Let us all take our seats and get started on the final panel of the day. What's that? No, that's it. That's it. Take your seats, take your seats, take your seats. We're going to get rolling. The PLA is kind of an important topic, so I don't want to cut them off too early. Kind of sorry we put you guys last because this really is a pretty great lineup on the panel. I'm sorry, Brendan. Burden falls on you guys to keep everybody awake for the next hour and 15 minutes. So without further ado, what's up? Start with Adam and then whatever after that. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to whatever fell over on the stage. And then after that, I'm going to hand it over to the Jamestown fellow, Joe McReynolds, who will introduce our excellent panel and do an extremely capable job moderating. And I think we should still wrap up sometime around, what time is it now? Like 3:30? 3:30? Okay, we might wrap up a little late, like 4:45-ish. So I apologize for that to everybody, but I hope that we'll make up for it with an excellent panel. So take it away, Joe.
Right side, okay. Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, which is probably most of you, my name is Joe McReynolds. I'm a China Security Studies Fellow here at the Jamestown Foundation, Principal China Cyber Analyst over at SOCI Special Programs Division, co-founder along with Elsa and a few others here, Peter Mattis of the China Cyber and Intelligence Studies Institute, and soon to be visiting fellow at NIDS in Tokyo. And we have a really great panel for you today, looking from a few different angles at developments in the PLA. We've got Adam Nee here, and let me just make sure I do not butcher his bio. Adam's a visiting fellow at the Strategic and Defense Studies Center at ANU, coming from Australia. And he'll be talking about a number of recent reform efforts in the PLA. Then we've got Brendan Mulvaney, who runs CASI, China Aerospace Studies Institute, along with Ken Allen. And Brendan's a longtime military veteran. We have Elsa Kenya, who's now a PhD candidate at Harvard, and is going to talk to us about China artificial intelligence for military programs. And we have Mark Stokes from Project 2049 and a couple decades in the Air Force, and a lot of work around Taiwan, Raytheon, and all sorts of places. He's going to talk to us, I think, about more long-range precision strike. Got an excellent panel, and in the interest of time, we'll just kick it straight over to Adam and get going.
Thank you. Military modernization effort, and to take stock of some of the recent developments and highlight a few things that we might look out for as we go forward. So I'm not going to talk about capabilities because I think there's a lot of that stuff out there. So instead I'll focus on organizational change at a higher level. So since the late 2015, the PLA has undergone massive organizational reform, and it's probably the most sweeping organizational reform that the PLA has faced since the 1960s. And that process is still ongoing. The reform is less complete than it appears on a PLA organizational chart. And the PLA anticipates that process to last through to 2020. The progress of the reform has been quite rapid since late 2015 and early 2016, given the scale of it. At the start of 2016, the Central Military Commission, as you may know, issued a directive on what they're trying to achieve with this round of reform. And the PLA has essentially tried to carry out that timetable as stipulated by the CMC, the Central Military Commission. So particularly the above neck reorg, that's been complete. The big institutional blocks have been moved into place, and now the PLA is working below the neck adjustments to ensure that the reform work as intended, which is supposed to be complete by 2020, and I think that is highly optimistic. The biggest item of reform are leadership, management, and command system changes, joint operation command system, putting a new joint ops system in place, changes to force size composition, and also reform to military education institutes, talent development systems, etc. So a breakdown of the goals. By 2015, to have completed the top-level organizational restructuring, to have created the joint command system. By 2016, to reduce force size and compositional changes, and to reform the military academies, schools, systems, and the PAP, the People's Armed Police. And from 2017 to 20, further improve and reorganize the PLA to make sure that the new systems are working as intended, but also to push efforts in some other areas such as civil-military fusion and military regulations and policies. So what have they done so far? A few big items. So they've redefined and clarified the role of the CMC, role of and relations of the CMC, theatre commands, and the services. Essentially, the CMC takes overall charge, with theatre commands conducting operation, and the services are responsible for force development. The abolishment of the 4 general departments, subsuming their function on 15 functional organs within the CMC, which theoretically improves CMC oversight. The reorganization of 7 military regions into 5 joint theatre commands with a nascent joint command system. So a more genuine shift towards jointness. The elevation of the 2nd Artillery Force, China's missile force, to be a service co-equal with the traditional 3 services, a full service status. And the creation of, and importantly, the creation of the Strategic Support Force, which consolidates military space and information warfare assets and capabilities from across the PLA. So that's top-level organizational reform. What else? Okay, so reorganization of the military education and research institutes, so reducing their numbers and streamlining them. The resubordination of the People's Armed Police under the CMC and reform to the People's Armed Police, which has implications for how China exercises power projection in terms of grey zone activities and domestic security. So we also saw, of course, the reduced 7-member CMC coming out of the 19th Party Congress, reduced from 11 members, and Xi having come out of that very well, with a strong grip on the military following the 19th Party Congress, including the enshrining of the CMC responsibility system into the CCP constitution. So it is essentially the organizational reform and force restructuring of the PLA is roughly on schedule to the schedule set out by the CMC, maybe 6 to 12 months behind by some estimates. But I think that's very good considering the sweeping nature of these reforms. So going forward, a few things to watch for. So I think the PLA will keep moving away from the army dominant mentality towards genuine jointness and power projection capabilities. So in areas such as air, maritime, missile, and information, so that's space and network domain. The strategic requirement demands it. China's footprint is increasingly expanding overseas, and the PLA will need the ability to project power in support of and in the protection of China's expanding footprint globally. That means resource shifts. It means developing new doctrines and operational thinking, which they lack. They've only started that process. And the continued investment in overseas infrastructure for military operations. the continued development of the Strategic Support Force as essentially the information warfare service of the PLA. It's not technically a service, but in a lot of different ways it acts as a service and is indeed a tip of the PLA spear along with the rocket force, conventional elements of the rocket force. The PLA is still too bloated. It needs to be further downsized, and I think over the next few years we will see that. Very probably from the ground forces, mostly non-combat roles. The PAP reform also technically would cut down the numbers, given that they would be resubordinating some of the functions of the PAP to civilian organizations. The CMC, of course, needs to be mindful of issues to do with military veteran benefits and in system. On the political side, there's a continuing big propaganda and political education campaign for loyalty towards Xi personally. So not even to CMC, but to Xi personally. And I think this will intensify as the domestic pressure builds for Xi from the escalating confrontation with the US. We saw a wholesale change of PLA top leadership in 2017 in the lead up to the 19th Party Congress, and Xi came out of that with tighter control of the PLA. There are a large number of very grown-tooled PLA officers for a number of different reasons, including Xi's attempt to divest the PLA of commercial interests, which they don't like. And in any case, I think we should be watching carefully PLA leadership changes for clue on Chinese elite politics. So to sum up, this massive round of reorganization is still very much a work in progress. It is far less complete than what it appeared on paper in org charts, and it will take years before the PLA can make the necessary adjustments to make the system work as intended. I wouldn't recommend it, but if anybody wants to attack, then the time is now. So, thank you.
Wow. Not the position of the Jamestown.
Well, thank you, Adam. And then over to Brendan for 10 minutes.
Follow that. Well, yeah, we'll save all those comments till the afternoon. So first, thanks for having me to the Jamestown Foundation. I am really excited that we're going this way down the panel. I was super worried that I was going to have to follow Mark and Elsa, and they were going to steal all my thunder. But then I thought about it and then thought it probably would have been better to let them go first, and then I could just pile on, because I'm going to say something, and then she's going to repeat something, but it's going to sound way better coming from her. So the panel was traditional, non-traditional, and emerging. So I'll try not to steal too much thunder on the emerging side, but I do want to talk about the PLA Aerospace in general, which includes obviously the Air Force as the bulk, but there's a lot of other assets to it. And then that'll lead hopefully right into Elsa's talk. So maybe we'll have a good convergence there. From traditional, what's going on? We're going to talk about assets, right? So they have a very big Air Force. A lot of it is old, but a lot of it is very new. And they have a concerted plan to acquire and deploy new aircraft throughout the force. This includes fighters, it includes bombers, it includes their helicopter force, and the thing that they are lacking, but they know they're lacking, and we're seeing them try to work on it, is long distance logistics and air-to-air refueling, right? So these are kind of the big weaknesses that the PLA Air Force has currently. They are aware of it. They're trying to figure out how to do it. How are they doing this? They're doing it indigenously, right? So indigenous innovation is a big thing. They want to be self-reliant, but they're also doing it because they're importing largely from Russia, right? So there's just certain things that the PLA and China in general is incapable of doing at this point. Now, I tell people, well, it is rocket science, but it's just rocket science. So if you put enough manpower, you put enough money behind it, they're going to be able to crack these codes, right? So aircraft engines is the thing that comes to everybody's mind probably when we talk about this, right? So this is not something that is impossible for them to do. They will do it, and when we see them do it, that's when we really need to pay attention to something that's going on within China. Until then, they're still able to get their hands on it. They're importing, like I said, from Russia. The Russians continue to not learn their lesson. The Chinese say, oh, we're going to buy hundreds and hundreds of aircraft from you. They get a handful of them, and they say, no, thanks, we're good. We're just going to copy the ones we have. The Russians fall for it every time. Right now, they need an export market. They're taking receipt of more and more advanced aircraft. They're due for another tranche of the Su-35s here shortly. As Ken Allen would point out, although they make the news and they're photographed to lots of places, they're not actually operational at this point. They have a couple aircraft that fly here and there to make it look like they're out flying around, but they're not deployed in an operational and ready status at this point, but they will be soon. They have the J-20, which made its big debut 2 years ago at Zhuhai, 2 years ago next month. They've got the Y-20 coming out, as well as some long-range air-to-ground cruise missiles. We talked a little bit about the nuclear implications of that earlier. As most people here probably are aware, nuclear and conventional forces are not separated in the PLA as they are in many other forces, and this makes both targeting, command and control, and assessment very interesting. So we'll see how these new weapon systems come on, what platforms they go on, and then ultimately who does the command and control, which is a lot of what we were talking about. And the organizational reform is trying, we believe, to get the PLA is trying to get a better control of the CMC specifically. So that's kind of the traditional. What is going on new? They're getting new missions. Right, so the Strategic Air Force is something that the PLA Air Force is striving for. They've been told to do this. They have a worldwide vision. The United States has very helpfully given them a blueprint of what a Strategic Air Force looks like. They've literally translated that into Chinese, and they're copying it one for one and just kind of ticking down that. Xi Jinping specifically told, when speaking about that, said technology is one of our core combat capabilities. So this tells the Air Force directly that, hey, you are the service that is in charge of making sure that we're making the most of the technological changes, some of which are going to come from others, but the Air Force was specifically told that this was one of their core competencies that they have to incorporate going forward. To piggyback on some of the organization, one of the big things we've seen in the Air Force specifically is the shift to brigades. Cassie put out a great book on it. Long story short, they are trying to make it a more nimble, more flexible, and adaptable force. The bad thing for them, the good thing for others, is that the PLA culture doesn't really like that. So the attempt was to try to intermingle things to make it more of a joint force. They have a hard time doing cross-platform, even within the PLA Air Force, not to mention with other services. The brigade issue was an attempt to get at that. As of today, we haven't seen any real progress in that. They've simply just cut out a layer of organization, which of course then goes back to an organizational question. If you cut out an entire layer and there's no opportunity to command at that layer, well, what happens to all those people in that field, right? So this is going to be a real personnel issue for them, because in their personnel system, and everyone here knows Ken Allen, and grades and ranks are important, but when you cut out something at one of those levels, what happens to those pilots? And this is something that the PLA has not figured out yet. In the slightly non-traditional, or things that they haven't traditionally done, perhaps still traditional warfighting, but not something the PLA has done traditionally, is flying over water, especially the Air Force. There's a great quote in an Air Force handbook from the end of the last century that essentially says, flying over water is scary, conditions change, don't do it, leave it to the Navy. So you see that obviously that has changed a lot. They're getting a lot of press. We have a forthcoming publication that talks about how they're doing that, why they're doing it. It's a bid for more and more of a maritime roles and missions for the Air Force specifically. But keep in mind, the PLA Navy has a naval aviation branch that is out in the forefront of this as well. So we're seeing some competition within the services for who's going to have the biggest say in that, but they are both doing it, and they're both doing a lot more of it. We're all familiar with the flights up and down the Bashi Channel, the Miyako Straits, around Taiwan. Our Japanese allies have made this front and center of one of their strategic messaging points that, hey, this is something that is impacting them and therefore U.S. allies and interests specifically in the region. So we need to work more closely with them to make sure that we're fully aware and making the best use of all the assets that we have, and not simply leaving some of our allies, friends, and partners out there to deal with it on their own. But that's certainly one of the big things that we're going to be contesting with, which we really hadn't seen up until the last couple of years. As far as training in aviation goes, They are starting to do some more of it. The theater command change is a bid for them to become more joint. This is an express issue for them. Again, we've published a lot of doctrine, told the Chinese about 10, 15 years ago, hey, this is how you fight wars. This is really what you need to do. Here's how you do it. Turns out they listened. It took them a little while to get to it, but they're getting around to it. They've made their training more joint, and they're making their training far more realistic than it ever was before. So the PLA is not 10 feet tall. They have a lot of room to make up for. They have a lot of cultural things that are standing in their way, but they are making steps on that ladder. So we shouldn't exaggerate the rate at which they're changing, but we should be mindful that they are changing and keep an eye on that rate. One of the things that in my mind at least, is non-traditional is this recent emphasis on military-civil fusion, right? And military comes first for a reason. This is different than CMI in the U.S. context. This is the military driving civilian state-owned enterprises and essentially all levers of power that the Chinese state can bring to bear to serve the military. This is where they're going to crack some of those things. It's far better for them to have a civilian airliner that works on engines and cracks that, and then that gets applied, because that isn't nearly as threatening to the rest of the world as if you had specifically just the PLA Air Force working on engines or integrating systems, which is really where the future of aviation is these systems integration piece, which they still struggle with. So that the military civil fusion piece is important. It is important for us to understand and to keep an eye on, and to see how the industrial base of China is serving not just the aerospace community, but also specifically the PLA, the Air Force, and Naval Aviation. Some of the emerging things here, obviously swarms and drones. The PLA has no qualms about using off-the-shelf technology, about using their own technology, about stealing it from others, and as we've seen, exporting it all around the world. Everyone knows DJI is the biggest exporter of drones in the world. Are they the absolute top of the line? No. Are they good enough? For a lot of places they're getting deployed and for a lot of uses they are absolutely good enough. And that's one of the things that has been a hallmark of the PLA reforms and their acquisitions is good enough is good enough until they can become the front of the line. So what are they doing with these things? They are looking at exercises and training integration. They are looking at swarm technology and how are they going to integrate that, much like in Ghost War, or Ghost Fleet, where they talk about this. Everything in Ghost Fleet was based on technology that actually exists, right? It may not have actually been deployed or fully developed, but all those things they talk about there are possible, and that's something the PLA is certainly taken great advantage of and looked at. And Elsa is the queen of UAVs as far as it comes to the PLA, so she can probably expand on that part. 1 minute, okay. And then everything that builds on that, the high technology, the use of space, the use of AI is certainly prevalent throughout the aerospace community, be it the Air Force, the Space Force, which is part of the SSF, or the Naval Aviation community. So they're leveraging all those things. They all have their own directorates looking at these things and how to incorporate them, and it's something they're actively working on. Are they nearly as advanced as we are? No. Do they have a DARPA like we do? No. But it's still something that they're doing that is new, that is emerging, that we don't know exactly where they stand. Hypersonics is probably the one area where they are at least as capable, if not perhaps a little bit more advanced than we are in this particular case. So with that, I will stop, and she will make everything I said sound a lot smarter.
All right. Well, I want to start off by saying thank you to the Jamestown Foundation. Some of my earliest articles on these issues came out in China Brief, so it's wonderful to be here. And thank you to Matt for organizing a great conference and to Joe for moderating our discussion. So to keep you entertained this afternoon, after a long day of fabulous discussions, I'll be taking the conversation in rather a different direction, into something rather spooky, so to speak, and I'll be talking about Chinese advances and ambitions in quantum science and technology in particular. So no need to fear, I will not try to give you all a crash course in quantum physics in the next 10 to 15 minutes, and I will try to stick to my time, so no worries on that front, Joe, but I will try to provide a reasonably nuanced and balanced assessment of what quantum technology is, why China is prioritizing it so highly against the backdrop of a quite ambitious agenda for a national strategy of innovation-driven development that focuses both on the economic potential and military applications of emerging technologies in which China sees an opportunity to be a first mover and take the lead, try to provide some perspective on what this might mean in terms of future military applications and strategic implications of these technologies. So, as I mentioned, I'll be talking about an issue that's inherently very technical and uncertain, and I approach this as a quasi-political scientist who has been lucky to talk to a number of quantum scientists along the way, though any confusion remaining is my fault alone, and I am in good company with that shock and confusion, given that these technologies may seem magical, and I won't quite get into the full granularities here, though happy to get more into the weeds in the discussion, but it is quite clear that we may be on the verge of a new technological revolution in which China could be at the forefront of advancing several new disruptive technologies leveraging quantum properties, which include superposition. Just to start you off with some basic principles, the idea that a particle, like a photon, can be across all possible states at the same time. Like, I feel like I'm in a superposition between Cambridge and DC most of the time, trying to be in both places at once. And another core principle there is entanglement, the notion of linkage among particles at a distance, or spooky action at a distance, as Einstein said rather derisively at the time. And some of the technologies that can come into play when scientists become better able to leverage these unique properties include quantum cryptography, especially quantum key distribution, which is supposedly unhackable or uncrackable, but in actuality may have a range of shortcomings and engineering challenges and vulnerabilities, though some of these are increasingly being mitigated through new technical advances in the field. There's promises of infinitely powerful computing that could enable immense, if not exponential, increases in computing capabilities using qubits, a quantum analog of the bit, whereas a bit is only 0 and 1, a qubit can be in a superposition in multiple states at once, which enables that increase in power. And then there also are some reports of sensing capabilities or stealth-defeating radar, which are varying degrees of credible or lack thereof, depending on the context, but there is quite a fair amount of enthusiasm, including in the Chinese defense industry, for advancing some of the military applications of these technologies. And in the aggregate, the notion of the second quantum revolution does imply the potential for a paradigm shift in technology and potentially impactful applications in the military realm, as well as new economic opportunities. And Xi Jinping himself is also seems to be quite seized of the importance of quantum technology, which has been highlighted under his leadership as a priority in Chinese S&T plans, but also a matter of national pride and prestige. When China launched the world's first quantum satellite, it was unsurprisingly the subject of official propaganda, given that it did demonstrate a first for China and the world that generated quite a lot of hype and headlines, even though it was essentially a science experiment, but does prelude a lot of what China is intending to do going forward in terms of pioneering advances in this field. And a growing number of quite capable scientists, many of whom have been studied and researched in leading universities around the world, are increasingly organizing what one of the pioneers of the field here characterizes as a group army to contest in the struggle for quantum supremacy. So there's a lot of international cooperation in this field, but growing competition as well, given the sense of the strategic importance of these technologies. And in this context, as a growing number of nations worldwide are investing in quantum technology, including the recent launch of a new strategic agenda for quantum science in the United States as of last month, China has been positioning itself as a quantum powerhouse against the backdrop of its ambitions to be a future superpower in science and technology and leader in global innovation by 2030. And already, if you look at what Chinese scientists have accomplished in the past couple of years alone, we've seen China emerge at the forefront of advances in the employment of quantum cryptography and communications, including recent advances in measurement device-independent quantum secure direct communication, essentially transmits information directly in quantum form, and thus mitigates some of the vulnerabilities in most types of cryptography. We've seen China construct a national infrastructure and backbone for quantum communications, while at the same time, Chinese scientists, and both in academia and private companies like Baidu and Alibaba, are also joining the race, or perhaps rather marathon, for quantum computing, exploring different pathways and different technical options to reach new and more capable kinds of computing, including through setting a world record in entanglement through a total of 18 qubits entangled across 6 entangled photons, beating Google's prior record of 9. So quite significant, at least experimental advances that promise significant contributions going forward, and also, as I mentioned, quite active research on quantum radar, sensing, metrology, essentially technologies that look to leverage quantum phenomenon, particularly entanglement, for new levels of precision in detection. Again, as I mentioned, some of the high-level focus on these technologies has been signaled in Chinese S&T plans, from the 863 plan dating back to the 1980s to Made in China 2025 to the series of mega projects launched under the 13th Five-Year Plan, which has highlighted quantum computing and communications as national priorities. And with this planning has come significant increases in the amounts of funding provided for quantum science, including hundreds of millions across different sources of support for the basic science, as well as $1 billion to China's new national laboratory for quantum information science. So quite significant amounts of funding that will continue to increase in the years to come, as well as recruitment of top researchers in the field along the way. And just to quickly, in the time remaining, to go through a couple of these categories of technologies and some of the advances, as I mentioned, the world's first quantum satellite, Moderator, launched in the summer of 2016, which has since been used for both experimentation, including teleportation of quantum information, or even a quantum encrypted video call between China and Austria. And incidentally, the satellite is the product of cooperation between the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Austrian Academy of Sciences, though the Austria part often gets left out in official media coverage here, coincidentally or not. But there is quite this, although an experiment at this point, and one that's been it is starting to be used in more practical ways, including to enable the scaling up or the integration with China's ground-based fiber optic networks in ways that can enable the transmission of cryptographic keys in quantum form in order to secure information and mitigate the risks of that such cryptography could be cracked going forward. As I mentioned, we're seeing the emergence of this national infrastructure, including the construction of a backbone network between Beijing and Shanghai, and growing number of local area networks and plans to expand nationally. And to the theme of this panel more directly, this growing infrastructure, which promises perfect security but may deliver, perhaps in some cases, only incremental improvements, it will have uses by the Chinese military as they're looking to improve the security of their communications. It's also a focus in this agenda for military-civil fusion as a dual-purpose infrastructure that is seemingly started to be used by the PLA, which is experimenting at least with sort of localized quantum communications. And according to Han Jianwei, China's top quantum physicist, or at least its most prominent one, who claims the PLA is already fully capable of using quantum communications in a local war and will continue to expand going forward, including to enable quantum communications to ships at sea, submarines underwater, and again, the security of these systems is debatable and debated even among scientists with far deeper technical knowledge than I have, and predictions range from that China could completely go dark to U.S. intelligence collection, which could be a game changer, perhaps comparable to the Battle of Midway in terms of the major shifts, in terms of visibility, or in this case, lack thereof. But I think certainly, though others predict that this sort of quantum cryptography could have only marginal or incremental improvements and likely will suffer from engineering challenges, it's perhaps too soon to say, though this does have a pathway for new experimental advances. As I mentioned, there's quite active research in quantum computing underway, with record-setting advances and goals to progress towards quantum supremacy, the point at which a quantum computer can outperform a classical computer, and beyond that going forward. So again, this will play out over decades to come, but Chinese scientists and companies are pursuing a range of different approaches to quantum computing and with quite well-resourced efforts. All right, and some of the potential applications here range from breaking cryptography to new kinds of optimization problems, and a lot of enthusiasm, both commercially and potentially military applications. And quickly to shift to some of the spookier capabilities, including recent reports on Chinese quantum radar, which, at least according to certain claims from the Chinese defense industry, could defeat stealth, which could, in theory, be a game changer. There are reasons to be somewhat skeptical of these reports, especially given how prominently they've been flagged in English language reporting, but at the same time, there clearly are a growing number of research institutes within China working on these lines of effort, as well as potentially more near-term feasible capabilities like quantum navigation to enable independence from satellite navigation. And across the board, across these technologies, we can see the emergence of more of a robust innovation ecosystem, the range of partnerships, this new national laboratory, quite a few military-civil partnerships, such as between University of Science and Technology of China and the China Shipbuilding Industry Corporation, and even provincial initiatives aimed at investing to build a local quantum industry. Of course, as Brandon aptly pointed out, that China is not 10 feet tall, so we should also take quite seriously these ambitions, but also recognize some of the major challenges and shortcomings, including challenges of cultivating and recruiting talent, building up the educational infrastructure to support that, idiosyncrasies and adverse characteristics of the research environment. Hard to know however many billions of funding allocated, whether they'll be invested and spent appropriately. And then also a question of whether China may be betting too heavily on quantum technology and could eventually prove disappointed if we see a quantum winter with disappointing results and some lags in terms of the research occurring. And again, as I mentioned, apropos of the theme of this panel, these technologies do promise new paradigms for information, and both in terms of cybersecurity and potentially in warfare, given the potential of quantum computing to break cryptography, new capabilities for timing, sensing, detection, and navigation with clear military relevance in the Indo-Pacific, and also commercially, the chance for China to have a first mover advantage in new quantum industries of the future. So in conclusion, and I hope you've all hung with me through this crash course, more or less, promise there won't be a test on quantum physics near the end of this panel, but it's clear that Chinese leaders at the level of Xi Jinping do recognize the strategic potential of quantum science and these technologies to enhance both China's economic competitiveness and potentially future military capabilities as well. The US has traditionally been a leader in this field, though here, as in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, or otherwise, China is catching up, and in some cases quite quickly. And when we think about the future of strategic competition, clearly innovation will be a new battlefield, so to speak, though also a realm of continued cooperation, and could see increased contestation of these technologies as China's advances and the US's attempts to remain a leader in this field play out on the global stage. Thank you, and I hope you'll, for those of you who don't know Schrodinger's cat, dead and alive, I hope I've at least managed to provide a quick intro and based on a report that came out with a much more detailed perspective, so I will look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
All right, Mark, take us home.
All right, thank you, Joe, Matt, Jamestown Foundation, others for a fantastic event so far. I'm humbled to be in the presence of giants here, and we've had Adam that's addressed reform and reorganization, and Brendan talked about aerospace power to include in some of the problems with engines. Elsa on the high-tech aspects, particularly quantum. What I was going to focus my remarks on is long-range precision strike, as Joe mentioned, as well as let's alter that a little bit and say the reconnaissance strike complex, with a particular focus on the PLA rocket force. Brendan, in his remarks, mentioned the problem that the China's defense industry and Air Force is having in the area of engines. Certainly, no reason to doubt that. That certainly seems to be the case. I would cite one possible exception, and that is on the traditionally cruise missile side, and something called a supersonic combustion ramjet engine, or scramjet for short. This is one of a propulsion system that's generally affiliated with hypersonic weapon systems. It's just one type. A scramjet engine would be an air-breathing propulsion system. Generally, is going to be on some kind of a hypersonic cruise vehicle. But hypersonics, when you start looking at the rocket force, formerly known as the Second Artillery, you start looking at the future, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Hypersonics is a way to sort of conceptualize the future direction, in the sense of defining hypersonics as a flight vehicle that doesn't follow a traditional ballistic trajectory. It goes in at the upper edges of the, let's say, about 100 kilometers. That's a rough dividing line between the atmosphere and space. Something that hugs that particular element within what's called near space, between 20 kilometers and 100 kilometers. So that's one way to look at the future of the PLA rocket force. So, my remarks are going to focus a lot on, are going to talk a bit about some of the technology aspects, or actually research, development, acquisition system, because this is one part of the reform and development, or the reform and reorganization that hasn't got, in my view, as much attention as it deserves, and I take part of the blame. But when you talk about reform and reorganization, the scramjet engine is one. Some of the research and development that's going into that. That's one example of reform and development that's taking place, reform and reorganization that's taking place within the defense industry. The establishment, there's long been a research institute underneath the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation that has focused on cruise missile engines, but now there's an entire research institute that's dedicated to nothing but basically hypersonic cruise vehicles, which is significant. It was a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, that it was established, actually 2012. It's significant when you establish this type of research institute within the large defense industrial enterprise. That's significant. That means it's not just basic research, not just fundamental research, but actually research that is geared toward engineering, research, and development. That's one example of a research institute in this area. The other one would be underneath the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, First Academy, also known as China Academy of Launch Technology, the ballistic missile people. When they establish a research institute for near space flight vehicles, that's significant as well. That's the other type of hypersonic vehicle, hypersonic glide vehicle, boost glide vehicle, a new type of ballistic missile. Probably in the latter stages of engineering research and development with a system probably called the DF-17 that was reported in terms of a test last year. Significant development. But this is the general direction that the PLA, at least the rocket force, appears to be going. The reform and reorganization effort within the rocket force doesn't appear to have significant implications in the near term. But if you look at a little bit longer term, the rocket force has been in transformation over the last, let's say, 10 years or a decade. They've been expanding in terms of numbers of brigades, probably warheads, but nuclear warheads, but it's not clear exactly to what extent. Structurally, they are reforming in different areas. If you look at the rocket force as a system of systems, you have the regular ballistic missile systems, the launch systems. You have the nuclear warheads, which generally is a system into itself. And then you have the civil engineering system that is a significant part of the rocket force. When you think of underground facilities, you think rocket force engineering corps. But in terms of broader force modernization strategy shaping their long-range precision strike, the command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance system is critical to this. And toward the end of my remarks, I'll talk a little bit about the strategic support force as well as theater-level ISR. But they made significant headway in developing a common operational picture, basically a way to integrate or at least correlate data that's coming in from the different services, different types of ISR systems. They're making with something called the Integrated Command Platform. Significant advancements in space-based and near-space ISR assets. As Elsa knows very well, UAVs and other forms of airborne ISR systems, and ground-based ISR, to include signals intelligence, or in their lexicon, technical reconnaissance, as well as ground-based surveillance radars, ground-based space surveillance, just a whole range of things in terms of the C4ISR. In the area of long-range precision strike, I've mentioned the hypersonic, but they're also developing extended-range land attack cruise missiles, terminally guided, they already have in field terminally guided medium-range ballistic missiles, intermediate-range ballistic missiles, and then, of course, DF-5B, probably the first generation of a MIRV, a multiple warhead system, and then eventually going to be probably in the next, in the near term, going to be deploying the first solid fuel mobile ICBM, the DF-41. Another aspect of force modernization with the rocket force that doesn't get a lot of attention, and this meshes with the last panel, it's worth remembering that nuclear deterrence is somewhat of a psychological concept, not entirely, but and so information operations, perception management is core and critical to the rocket force. There's a reason why they have a military political work system, and why, for example, historically, why several of their political commissars, people in the political work system from the rocket force or secondarily before, has moved on to other senior positions. For example, now the political commissar of the Central Theater Command. But there are others. Also, one of the few members of the Central Military Commission has roots in the rocket force, as well as the Minister of Defense, is a rocket force guy. The head of Strategic Support Force, Gao Jin, has roots in the rocket force. There's now a deputy chief of the Joint Staff Department, as well as one of the assistants to the chief of the Joint Staff Department that has roots in the rocket force. But the rocket force really is based upon the research, development, acquisition system. So when you look at the future of the force structure, it really it hinges on the research, development, acquisition system. It starts with, for example, warhead numbers. There's debates that appear sometimes about how many warheads does China have. Is it 200 or is it 3,000? Somewhere in this system, there's a staff officer who sits down and on a year-to-year basis or in a 5-year plan determines how many warheads they need. I have no idea how many they have, but the research, our DNA process starts with a staff that outlines requirements. 10-year, for example, 10-year plan, 5-year plan, and a year-to-year plan. They determine how many, exactly how many missiles they need, how many warheads, and all that goes along with the whole system. When they begin, the research and development acquisition phase begins with basic preliminary research. That's technologies that can fit a whole range of systems across the board. It eventually moves into program validation. That's where, because when you move into engineering R&D, that's a major expenditure of funds. And so you want to make sure that you're not going to be wasting resources. It doesn't matter what country you are. It certainly applies to the PLA. And so there's a significant effort that goes into program validation, and there's a whole system that is associated with this. And then you finally move into engineering R&D, where you work closely with the defense industry. And then from there, you move into the what's called design certification of design or design finalization, and then low-rate initial production. So tests that you see that going on from time to time, whether it's DF-41 or DF-17 or hypersonics, is going to be fitting into one of these phases in the research and development process. And to me, it's important to figure out exactly where they are in these different systems. But important also is that whenever they move into an engineering R&D phase, they also will simultaneously begin the physical infrastructure construction. So let's say, for example, DF-17, let's assume that they're in the latter stages of engineering R&D. DF-17 being probably the first generation of hypersonic weapon system developed. They probably already have a brigade that's been designated. That's there somewhere. It may be beginning what's called a seed unit or an operational test and evaluation unit. There probably already is a brigade that's been designated for the DF-41, the first mobile solid fuel ICBM. And so these are just things to be able to get a sense of when looking at the rocket force. In terms of brigade expansion, there has been a expansion. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but the restructure included some brigades that moved from one particular base. A base is an organizational structure. Corps leader, to use one of Ken's terms, roughly equal in stature or grade to a Army ground force corps. My argument, there are at least 2 brigades that are probably Corps deputy leader that provides for some of the career transition. But some reassignment of brigades from one particular area to another, but also the addition of several brigades. At least one up in northeast China, one just south of the Central Nuclear Warhead Storage and Handling Complex in the Taiwan Mountains. Probably at least one in Guangdong, a new one in Guangdong. You've had the introduction, of course, of the DF-26 intermediate range ballistic missile in southern Henan, probably the first unit equipped, and then probably a second one already equipped in Guangdong. a new brigade that's been established up in Sichuan as well. So there's been quite an expansion. How this translates into warhead numbers, I'm not exactly sure. 1 minute. So with all this, the ISR aspect is important. In terms of strategic level ISR support, the strategic support forces is different from the rocket force in the sense of it is, when you think reform and reorganization, rocket force is the most significant. And it's very, very difficult to get arms around exactly what it entails, exactly what, but part of, in my view, part of the rationale for this reform and reorganization to include establishment of the strategic support force goes back to the research, development, acquisition part of this. It makes sense when you bring all your space assets to include the R&D side of this, and all the staffs that are involved in doing this under one organization, and this does make some sense. On the other side, the network system side, you got the space system side, the network system side. Network system side is a former 3rd department, former 3 PLA, and combined with the former 4th department, which is strategic level electronic countermeasures. That one is much more difficult to figure out in terms of exactly how they've restructured that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Joe.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and thank you to all the panelists for really excellent presentations. We're going to start this off with, I have one quick question for each of you, and then I'm going to let you all chime in on whichever ones of them you find interesting. I'll just hit them one by one, all of you. For Adam, from your presentation, I noticed that you mentioned the reorganization of military educational institutes. And one thing there that really jumped out at me as odd is that it seems like a lot of science and technology research has been moved under Academy of Military Sciences, which is historically a body devoted to strategic research. And a very odd place, especially compared to, say, NUDT, National University of Defense Technology, to find a lot of more granular science and technology research going on. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on why that might be or why that looks strange. For Brendan, I was wondering your thoughts on post-reorg, what you see in terms of Air Force Technical Reconnaissance Bureaus, TRBs, and other information warfare units, and interaction between the Air Force and the Strategic Support Force. For Elsa, this may be a fantastically ignorant question, but we'll go for it anyway. So like in grad school for IR and security studies, we always think about offense dominance versus defense dominance in any given era of warfare, in part due to technology. And so I'm wondering, what about the balance between information warfare and conventional or kinetic warfare? Does unbreakable cryptography, quantum communications, and things like that seem to lean towards defensive options in warfare, does that shift us towards a future of warfare that might look a little bit more like the past, where the emphasis is on kinetic strike rather than on offensive information operations? Or not, obviously not a shift, a binary shift 1 to 0, but a sort of a shift in emphasis. And for Mark, I was wondering, what implications, if any, do the combination of new capabilities and the elevation of the former 2nd Artillery to the level of a service have on strategic roles and command and control and decision making in a war or a crisis? Would she use the rocket force today in much the same way that WHO could have used the 2nd Artillery a decade ago, or have things shifted? Whoever wants to jump in, feel free.
The short answer is I don't know. But the longer answer is the PLA has been very focused on thinking about how new technology and existing technology contribute to theory development, contribute to a whole range of new operational and strategic level theories. So that has been quite prominent in PLA literature. So I think in part this is an effort in putting the technological and the practical elements with the more traditional based AMS elements. So I think that's all I have on that.
So I'll echo his answer, and I don't know, but this is one of the things that we're looking at specifically is how the reorg in the theater commands. They have the command post, which seems to be, as far as we can tell, actually a fairly joint organization. The question is, how does the SSF fit into that? Because there isn't a theater command SSF. There's the theater command Air Force for all the theater commands that have water. There's a theater command Navy. How the SSF fits in there, and how each of those representatives, which are now permanent representatives, which is a change instead of it just being a rotation of billet. There's permanent Air Force, Navy, obviously Army now, and PLARF. I'm surprised you didn't say PLARF. It's just fun to say. Not as fun as YAP, but we'll go with PLARF. So the permanent representative, there's nobody from the SSF as far as we can tell. So that is an open question. Maybe the PLA hasn't figured it out. Maybe they're just not talking about it. But that is a very important question to understand how the Strategic Support Force is going to support each and every one of those, as well as the theater command. So something we're looking at, obviously a great question.
Great questions, Joe. I'll comment quickly on AMS because there is some relation there to the topics I focus on, then turn to the offense-defense balance, which is actually a really fascinating question that I could get into a much more extensive debate on, but won't. So with regard to AMS, first of all, I think this reorganization does reflect, as Adam mentioned, the focus on innovation that Xi Jinping has placed at the center of both of his national strategy and of his view for the future of the PLA, highlighting that military innovation is imperative given what the PLA sees as an advancing revolution in military affairs, catalyzed by these new technologies, and the concept, as he and other PLA strategists have articulated it, focuses on not only technological innovation, but also innovation in new theories and concepts of operations. And I think it is significant that AMS is now headed by a former director of NUDT, Yang Shujun, who does have quite a strong technical background himself, including in supercomputing, and some of this reorg has involved the setup of new research institutes and centers focused on unmanned systems, artificial intelligence, and other frontier technologies like quantum science and biotechnology. And pursuant to that, AMS has recruited however many hundreds of, or 194, I think was the figure I saw, PhDs who have a background in things like quantum science and intelligent systems, and likely continuing to recruit high-level scientists and researchers pursuant to that, while partnering with a number of civilian universities, including on quantum science and artificial intelligence and intelligent manufacturing. So a lot of parts in motion there, as discussed. And with regard quickly to offense-defense dominance, so at first glance, the notion of uncrackable cryptography would seem to imply more of a defensive shift, but at the same time, quantum cryptography, or the various versions of it, aren't truly uncrackable. There are still multiple vulnerabilities ranging from errors in engineering to human factors. So I think it's hard to imagine the PLA achieving their dream of perfect security, or China for that matter. So there are reasons to expect that this could prove in practice to be more of an incremental improvement, and that this quantum infrastructure could still prove vulnerable or less resilient in conflict scenarios, though certainly, and I think it could also be construed as destabilizing if there is an increase in security that reduces visibility and increases uncertainty in a rivalry for which more information and more transparency is, at least in theory, stabilizing. On the other hand, quantum computing, if it does succeed in breaking prevalent forms of cryptography, would sort of, in theory, shift towards more of an offensive orientation. And I think the challenge is less developing quantum-proof or post-quantum forms of cryptography that can withstand that, as actually implementing those forms of cryptography across legacy systems in the military and government that may be difficult to update. So I think I think these trends could go both ways, and I'm not sure if it quite makes sense to frame it in terms of an offense-defense balance, but definitely some potential for disruption based not only on the inherent qualities of these technologies, but also how they're actually implemented at a systemic level in the US and China going forward.
Excellent question. To be able to address it, I just briefly look at the way things used to be before 2016, and then speculate about how they could be now with the reform and reorganization going on. This is with regards to the rocket force, the PLARF, and in terms of command and control relationships, and also maybe weaving in a bit about the intelligence support. Before 2016, first of all, after 2012, the commander of the 2nd Artillery was a CMC member. Therefore, it had the same status as a service. In grade wise, is the same thing. Ken, correct me if I'm wrong. So it may not have been called a service or a June, but it in all effective purposes, it had the same grade. On the in terms of command and control, again, looking at how it worked before, there are, as a general rule, and there may be exceptions, but as a general rule, a brigade is going to have either a nuclear mission or a conventional mission. This is what they're trained for, what they're optimized for. And in a once some sort of an operational order comes down, or some kind of readiness alert comes down to a certain level, the Central Military Commission would assign brigades that under the bases, the Rocket Force 2nd Artillery bases are peacetime structures. So in a contingency scenario, they would assign conventional brigades and assign them to a theater command. The military region, similarly, that transforms into a theater command. So the way it is now, I'm guessing that part of it probably hasn't changed. There's been no indication that this type of command and control structure in peacetime, they generally are under the Rocket Force, and then in a contingency, the elements, conventional brigades would be notionally assigned to a theater command. The intelligence question, the ISR question, also looking at the ways it was before. Military regions, for example, the Nanjing military region had 2 technical reconnaissance bureaus. This would be roughly equivalent of signals intelligence, basically listening in on people, or maybe even cyber, computer, breaking into people's computers. These, as a general rule, reported to the it'd be the Nanjing military region headquarters department, operations department, or intelligence department. So with the restructuring that's going on right now with the Strategic Support Force, it's not clear what happened to the old military region technical reconnaissance bureaus. Whether some parts of these bureaus some elements of these bureaus appear to have moved over to the Strategic Support Force, and others appear to have moved over to the PLA Army, the theater command Army elements. Air Force, that's a different angle, but generally there would be, in a contingency, there would be a cell, some kind of intelligence cell that'd be supporting the commander. And with the Strategic Support Force, how that fits in is not clear. However, would note that there appears to be relatively senior, maybe corps deputy leader grade, maybe base or maybe just regular units that appear to be somewhere in proximity of each of the theater command headquarters.
Okay, and how long do we have for questions? Okay, cool. So we're going to open up the floor for questions. And sorry, you, yes, you. Can we just lead off?
Thank you. Joe Bosco, formerly with the Defense Department. Question for Dr. Mulvaney, if I understood your remarks earlier. Hello? Got it. Dr. Mulvaney, you described a period in China's military development where they were having problems, they were falling behind, they were not advancing at the very least. And you said we came to the rescue, that we provided whatever support they needed to solve the problem and move ahead. Was that a conscious U.S. policy to do that? And what was the rationale for it? And then a question generally for the panel. Any idea how many people in China that are working on these issues studied or worked in the U.S. first?
Let me just take a couple more questions and then we can, Caleb?
Caleb Duppendahl with CrowdStrike. With the former 4 PLA and 3 PLA being rolled into the SSF, how do you see this influencing perhaps the infrastructure of cyber operations? For example, could you see there being reconnaissance units tasked solely with gaining accesses that would then be parlayed off to other units for additional exploitation? And then secondly, if I may, have the former TRBs been confirmed as being officially subordinate to the Network Systems Department?
And let's get one more question. You there.
Mark, and also this is kind of related to what you talked about. So the PLA hasn't tested a nuclear weapon in a really long time, but they're obviously still doing subcritical tests. I was wondering, given the variety and number of new delivery platforms they're going to have, do you think that between a combination of supercomputing and advances in quantum technology and these subcritical tests that they're going to be able to develop a new warhead that they have enough confidence in to deploy, and or they're just going to stick with what they've got? Thanks.
Okay, let's kick it over to the panel.
So let me be clear that the answer is yes, but. So yes, it was a deliberate effort by the U.S. government during the period of engaging with the Chinese to the point where we were actually translating Aerospace Power Journal into Chinese into simplified form. So it wasn't for our friends and partners in Taiwan, it was for the mainland. And we just recently, once Cassie came about, stopped doing that. But the but is, it wasn't for the technical aspects of it. It was more reform, how to become a professional military. Hey, you need to develop an NCO corps. This is what NCO corps do. Hey, this is how we pay people. This is how we retain people. This is how you would shift from an all conscript or draftee force into a more professional force. So this is a bid to perhaps peel it away from the Communist Party and make it the National Army of China, or in any case, for a long time in the U.S. national security, we've had this view that as long as we're fighting a professional force, we can kind of know what to expect from them. And so we've brought along several forces which may or may not have interest aligned with us, because that way it's at least a professional military. So it was a concerted effort that's obviously drawn to a close. But it was not in that technical realm. So we were never transferring technology to them wholesale for that. It was more organizationally and psychologically.
I will take a quick stab at a couple of those questions. So first, to the point of Chinese scientists and researchers with experience in the US. In quantum science, it is indeed true, unsurprisingly, that there are a number of leading figures in this field do have experience of studying and pursuing research at top universities around the world, including MIT, Stanford, and otherwise. And I think and there have been deliberate efforts by the Chinese government through mechanisms like the Thousand Talents Plan to recruit scientists with this sort of experience to return and contribute. One example I came across in the course of my research was someone currently working on quantum science at the National University of Defense Technology who had pursued postdoctoral research at Stanford before returning to devote all of his attention to advancing military applications of these technologies, as characterized in PLA media reporting on his work. So I think I'll add that I think in many cases, quantum science is still a field where a lot of this is basic research and a science-first approach that does emphasize international collaboration, I think is important to advancing a field that in many respects does remain quite nascent. But I think there have been cases of collaborations that I think do start to raise some questions about advisability, including some research funding and partnerships in Australia involving CETC, the China Electronics Technology Group, or a state-owned defense conglomerate that does work on things like quantum radar and quantum sensing. So I think we should remain open as a nation to taking advantage of the benefits of the fact that students and researchers from around the world want to come here and hopefully stay here. I think there have been cases that do highlight some of the difficult questions that may arise as these technologies do become more sensitive and strategic and progress in their development. And secondly, on 3 and 4 PLA, it's hard to know exactly what those changes in infrastructure look like, but in theory, having a deeper integration of these reconnaissance and defensive elements of Chinese military cyber forces could enable a more effective approach to warfighting in this domain, or at least that seems to be a guiding concept for the creation of the Network Systems Department. I would just add that interestingly, there does appear to be a high-level unit intended to pursue network electronic countermeasures under the Joint Staff Department, so this integration isn't complete, and there are relevant units and capabilities still in some of the services and under theater command, so it's hard to know exactly how operations will be undertaken and how equities and will be disentangled, but certainly some interesting to watch how this will impact capabilities and approaches to operations going forward. Then thirdly, I will gladly defer to Mark on the question of warheads, but I will just say that I think complex simulations enabled by supercomputing and even the use of AI for more sophisticated simulations is a major focus of the PLA that could be useful both in testing equipment and testing out new concepts as they're trying to advance some of these new concept weapons and think about the characteristics of future warfare. So I'm sure a lot more work to be done and a lot to watch in that space, but we look forward to hearing Mark's answer.
Quickly on the those that have worked in the U.S., I'd say it probably depends upon, again, where they're at in the research and development process, the cycle. Those that are working on some basic science stuff, for example, Beijing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics, or Nanjing, the Nanjing equivalent, or Harbin Institute of Technology, probably going to see a larger number there. But those that are working in, for example, if you got a chief designer or a deputy chief designer for key weapon systems, probably not going to have a lot of experience in the U.S. or elsewhere, simply because of security reasons. So, because this is the real core of this is going to be on your key defense industrial enterprises. And so, but if it's more basic science stuff, you probably have a lot more exposure and exchanges in foreign countries. On the technical reconnaissance bureaus, kind of depends on how you define a TRB, a technical reconnaissance bureau. The 12 bureaus under the former 3rd Department, or 3 PLA, generally they would just be bureaus and not necessarily TRBs. So if you mean those 12, high level of confidence, yes, they have moved under Strategic Support Force. The 3 that were under the Air Force, the technical reconnaissance bureaus, TRBs, under Air Force, the 2 under Navy, and then the former military region ones, at least elements of those appear possibly have moved under Strategic Support Force, just based on military unit cover designations and addresses and things like that. But it's not clear yet. In terms of the obvious, I don't know what effect this would have on their missions, on cyber or regular SIGINT, but give you a couple of examples that would just be natural, have implications. Jinan military region, which, Shandong and then Henan. That's been absorbed and integrated with the former Shenyang military region. Shenyang MR had a TRB, and then Jinan had a TRB. So these somehow, I don't know if they remain intact or what happened to these, but the missions probably would be more integrated now, perhaps. And the same for Western Theater Command out there. So I would sort of offer that as for consideration. The key question in my mind is there's something going on with the Navy ones and the Air Force, because these reporting direct to headquarters in Beijing, both of these, not to theater commands, and how these fit in is not exactly clear. On the nuclear stockpile issue or the nuclear warhead issue, they have to have something, some way to be able to test, not just for future systems, but for the systems they have in their stockpile today, just for reliability and modern, just to make sure. For refurbishment and things like this. So they have some ICF is one term, and I forgot what it stands for, inertial or internal confinement. That there's something that they have in place to be able to provide some replacement for actual testing.
Okay, we have time for one more round of questions. In the far back there. Yes, go for it. Pointing at you.
Thanks a lot. Andrew Chubb from the Columbia Harvard China and the Worlds program. All 4 of you have done some great work on the PLA's political work, whether it be the institutional side or some of the conceptual stuff. So I'm interested to sort of draw out any links with the previous panel. So to what extent has the PLA political work system been involved in this sort of large expansion of United Front work that we've been hearing about and thinking about over the last couple of years? And to what extent has it actually sort of been cut out of that side of the party's work? And how might it relate to some of the elements of the reorganization that was initiated in 2016? Thanks.
Okay, additional questions? Go for it.
JC Gorn, the Air Force. Quick question, just we've seen the PLA struggle with command and control in just their basic operations that we've seen in probably the last 10 years, military operations other than war. With all this technology that they're developing, how are they going to be able to employ it? And I know that might be kind of a difficult question to answer, but will they be able to employ it, and how will their command and control integrate with that?
Okay, and last chance for a question. Anybody? Right up front.
I'm from the Tel Aviv Institute for National Security Studies. What of that do you project seeing in the Middle East?
And I would just piggyback onto that question to ask, as it seems like the U.S.-Saudi relationship is entering a very tumultuous phase, given the knowledge sitting on this panel about Chinese arms exports. I'm wondering, do you guys see, if there was a major rupture between the U.S. and the Saudis in terms of weapon supply relationships, things like that, could China potentially step in to fill the breach at all, or is that not a possibility?
So on the political work side, I'm unaware of any direct connection between the political work departments in the PLA and the things that they're doing outside of the PLA. It's not to say they're not there. It's all part of the Communist Party, right? I mean, so everyone knows the PLA is not, as I said earlier, not China's army. It's the Communist Party's army. And so I'm sure they're integrated, but I'm not aware of any PLA actively involved in anything outside of China. As far as command and control, this is one of those things that we're definitely taking a close look on. The Chinese love their command. They love not to push it down to anybody. Some of the technology allows them to get into the cockpit or to maintain that control. There's a open discussion as far as what will AI do to them? Will they turn it over to AI or will they not? So one possible opinion is if you get the right algorithm, that AI is absolutely 100% politically reliable, cut out all those damn humans because we don't know what they're going to do. Another argument is no way are they going to turn over command because they want to be in control. So that's an open question on the AI, but it is certainly facilitating their ability to command from a centralized location. Ken's got a great article about moving flight controllers. Essentially, for those of you who don't know, the commanding officer would be up in the tower directing the pilots what to do and where they could go. They used to not be able to fly beyond visual range, and then once they had radars, they could do it from radar, and now they do it electronically. And so he has an article that says they took the microphone out of their hand and replaced it with a mouse, right? And so now the CO is now sitting at the bottom of the tower directing people electronically. So it is certainly facilitating that. In the Middle East, it would have to be one heck of a rupture. I'm sure the Chinese would jump all over it, but I don't see it going that badly because the Saudi-U.S. defense relationship, for good, bad, or otherwise, is so tight and so expansive. What you are going to see in the Middle East certainly are going to be the UAVs. Certainly are going to be some of these other things that have military implications, military links to it. The one thing we have not seen any hide nor hair of is any kind of long-term deployments by the PLA Air Force. The Navy has a new base in Djibouti. They learned that doing logistics through the anti-piracy patrols, this is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that they did it. It's really hard long distance, and this is what it takes. The Air Force, man, it's been several years now, had a really, really hard time flying planes across Asia to participate in some war games in Turkey. We haven't seen anything like that since then. It's really hard, so I wouldn't say the PLAF is going to show up anytime soon, but certainly some of these other elements and definitely the AI and the UAVs.
A great question on political work. I don't have a complete answer on that, but to my knowledge, the one significant change that's occurred with the transformation of the General Political Department to the Political Work Department was the movement of the operational unit, Base 311, or the Three Warfares Base, in which Mark is the absolute expert. So looking forward to hearing from him on that, seemingly to the Strategic Support Force, which can imply an integration of cyber and psychological operations, or perhaps also implying a change in the focus of the Political Work Department, though I haven't come across structural changes in that system. What I have seen are some sort of more theoretical conversations about how political work is failing to reach Chinese millennials, which is why it needs to go mobile, it needs to be gamified, it needs to be more accessible for a new generation of those entering the PLA who may not always be thrilled about Xi Jinping thought, among other things. So perhaps some technical updates in political work. I even came across a rather bizarre discussion of how AI might be used in political work to enhance psychological manipulation, which conceivably could be used defensively or offensively going forward. So perhaps some interesting things to watch on that front. I'm not aware whether anyone has tried to create an AI political commissar or whether any poor algorithm has been tasked to devour all of Xi Jinping's copious writings and pronouncements and come up with what is the correct line on all things, party commanding the gun and whatnot. So we'll see where that goes, but perhaps some interesting things to watch as political work tries to enter the 21st century. Secondly, on command and control, a lot of great questions and could be a much more extensive debate there, but I'll just say, apropos of some of my research, I've come across a lot of apparent enthusiasm on the part of the PLA for using AI to support command decision making, or even a fairly authoritative commentary from the Joint Staff Department calling for greater use of big data, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence as they update their integrated command platform and work towards a future command system for joint operations. So perhaps some technical changes there. And yeah, given that the PLA seems to have, in some cases, a lack of confidence in the capability of their commanders, as Dennis Blasco and others have pointed out, sort of a lack of confidence that they have the capability to make good decisions in a combat scenario, which does not bode well for any operational engagement. So perhaps potentially a turning to technology in an attempt to compensate there. And thirdly, I'll refrain from commentating on Middle East geopolitics, but I would say that we've seen Russia, including in Syria, start to use some of these ongoing conflicts as a way to test out technologies and test out its forces and even new concepts and experimentation with drones, with cognitive electronic warfare, among other things. And China's closely watching what Russia's doing in terms of its involvement in these sorts of conflicts, and certainly the PLA may gain its own lessons or experience from the fact that in some cases Chinese UAVs, like the Gongji-1 or the GJ-1, as it's designated in the Air Force, or the pterodactyl for the Winglong as used for export, plus the Saihong 4 and 5 models as they're used in combat. Some of the lessons learned from them may inform future design, or at least make these more high-end UAVs battle-tested, so to speak. So perhaps some interesting learning and opportunities for experimentation for the PLA, even if they're not actually directly involved in any of these ongoing conflicts.
On the starting with the political, the PLA and the political work system and political warfare or influence ops. I'm going to show my bias here because I come from a military background, so tend to look at some a PLA-centric perspective. But look at the history of United Front operations, particularly in the Civil War context. 1937, the core of the political work that was directed against the Republic of China central government from 1937, the Second United Front, PLA. There was a general political department. And you look at the Xi Jinping's father, Xi Zhongxun, originally. It came from PLA, propaganda aspect of it. But my view is that a lot of the, that someone discussed last time, the Central International Liaison Department, the core of that, a lot of the guys came from the old PLA General Political Department, Enemy Work Department. The so-called Enemy Work Department was one of three major underground organizations historically, and it transformed into what became the Liaison Department. The Central Military Commission Political Work Department Liaison Bureau has assumed the former General Political Department Liaison Department missions. It still exists. The 311 base is, as also correctly mentioned, operationally focused. I don't think it ever really was completely under the command of the Liaison Department, but certainly they work closely together. The 311 base is called the euphemism is the public basically propaganda, psyops, and then lawfare, legal warfare. It still exists, moved under the Strategic Support Force. It's not clear exactly why. It used to be very Taiwan focused in terms of its mission, headquartered in Fuzhou. There's something going on with it. It appears to be expanding its mission, but political warfare, influence ops in terms of military liaison work still exists. and underneath the political work department. In a broader sense, to get in terms of the Central Military Commission, when you look at the staff, the General Office Central Military Commission traditionally been dominated by political work officers. The ones that came from war fighting, the regular operational chain of command, are an exception. But when you look at a lot of the officers that are in the General Office Director, right now he's a political appointee. He came with Xi Jinping, not unusual. But you look at the bureaus underneath there, they generally come from the political work system. These are the guys that manage, they're the gatekeepers for the Central Military Commission. They're political work people. The political work system is alive and well. Each theater command, if they, like before, probably has their own liaison department. Bear in mind that they were the ones that ran the Sanya Initiative. When you think about targeting U.S. defense policy in terms of planning, some of our big key planning documents that give planning guidance to on what to program and plan and for the target for that in terms of manipulating perceptions probably is still going to be PLA. And then when you look at some of the doctrine stuff on psychological operations, strategic psyops, I've yet to run across in terms of some of the basic doctrine that they would have a civilian equivalent. However, the PLA used to be one of the political work academies at Nanjing, but a subordinate one in Shanghai. Tended to be sort of the heart of a lot of the fundamental psyop stuff. And psyops is the basis for propaganda. How you manipulate public perceptions, or how you manipulate an individual. A lot of it has to do with psychology, and to include social psychology. On the command and control, going back to CMC, that's a very long subject, but look very carefully at the what used to be the General Staff Department, Joint Operations Bureau. Because command and control, my impression, tends to be very centrally and very senior level, with today the General Staff Department or the General Staff Department or the Joint Staff Department Operations Bureau continuing to play a critical role. All orders go through this, with one exception historically. That happened in 1969. But, on the arms sales issue, my guess they're getting smart. There's probably a lot that goes on at the research and development level. At that level, that's harder to trace.
And with that, thank you to all of our excellent panelists. And turn it back over to Glenn to finish up the day.
Everyone, thank you very much for coming today. Thank you to Matt for doing all this hard work on this. John Folks, thank you all the staff today. And look for us online. We'll have this video posted to the website shortly after the conference. And hope to see you again next year. Thank you for coming.
Great to meet you. Great to meet you. There was a few questions about the Air Force.